True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Jay Orbin lived to be exactly 45 years old. He was murdered on September 8, 2004, which was his 45th birthday. It was just over a month later when his decomposing torso was found in a Rubbermaid container in the Phoenix desert. Everyone would agree that Jay had been kind and hard-working throughout his life. He was a self-made man and a loving father. Unfortunately, he was married to a very conniving and cold-hearted woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Jay met his future wife Marjorie while she was working at a Phoenix strip club. And she was just Jay's type, a beautiful, blonde, big-breasted, exotic dancer. And soon he was calling her the love of his life. Join us at the quiet end for What She Wanted, the plot to kill Jay Orbin. Jay and Marjorie married and eventually had a child together. But Marjorie just wasn't cut out for long-term monogamy. She did have multiple extramarital affairs while married to Jay, and she soon wanted him out of her way. But leaving him was not an acceptable solution for Marjorie, who also wanted to keep all of Jay's money for herself. So she decided that murder was the only solution.
And today's beer is one called Kilt Lifter. This is a Scottish ale, 6% ABV, brewed by Four Peaks Brewing Company in Tempe, Arizona. So this is a fairly nice, kind of one-dimensional Scottish ale. Dark amber color, little tan head. Both the aroma and taste are that of caramel, medium-bodied. It's nice, but it's nothing special.
Well, I know you say that, but the name, I just love the name. For me, it's worth buying a can just to see the label. Love it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's open it up and see how really good it is. All right. Over here at the quiet end. And Dickie, why don't you start us out today?
Okay. Jay Orbin was the second son of Jake and Joanne Orbin. Just like your family, they're all Jays. They were a couple who were both born and grew up in small Pennsylvania towns. Jay had an older brother, who was Jake Jr., also born in Pennsylvania. Jr. suffered from severe asthma when he was a youngster, and his pediatrician recommended that the family live in a drier climate. And that's how they ended up in Phoenix. Doesn't get too much drier than Phoenix, does it?
Or hotter.
Or hotter.
So Jake, Joanne, and young Jake Jr. moved to Phoenix within a couple of months of that recommendation. They took it very seriously. They packed up their belongings in their station wagon and drove out west. In 1956, they were able to buy a small house in the Phoenix suburb of Alta Vista. Jake and Joanne worked multiple jobs to pay their bills. They were a blue-collar, middle-class family living from payday to payday. But they were close, they were a tight-knit unit, and they attended church services together every Sunday as well.
Now, 3 years after they got to Phoenix, it would be 1959, Jay Orbin was born. Around the time of his birth, his father had found a career with the post office, and his mother had worked her way up to assembly line manager at a manufacturing company. Now, little Jay had a typical 60s American childhood. Played Little League, rode bikes, swam in the family's outdoor pool. And he and his brother, Jake Jr., were close enough in age that they played and went on adventures together. And in the summertime, they would spend their days by the pool, and their friends were always welcome there to spend their time with the kids as well.
Well, sports were also a big part of the Orbin family's lives. Jake coached Little League, and when Jay was 12 years old, the whole family went with him to the playoffs. Even though he was born in Phoenix, Jay did follow the family tradition of rooting for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he would actually remain a Steelers fan for the rest of his life. As a teen, Jay was tall and lanky. He was able to grow a mustache from an early age, which he wore with that middle-parted feathered hairstyle that was so popular at the time. As he became an adult, Jay grew to 6 feet tall and 230 pounds. He had blue eyes and this kind of cute, crooked, charming smile.
6 feet, 230, a little bit overweight.
He was a chubby guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He got chubbier, too, as many of us do.
I know. So when he was still a teenager, Jay got a job at a garden shop. He'd work evenings there after school, and he'd work on the weekends. And through this job, he found side work in landscaping. So after he graduated high school in 1977, Jay did landscaping full-time. He even started his own company, which he called Landscape Matters, and he brought his brother in as his partner. So Jay went out with the crews, and Jake Jr. did the office management. And as the business grew, they were both able to buy big 4x4 pickup trucks to cart around their tools and machinery. In 1978, the brothers bought a home together in Mesa. That's another suburb of Phoenix. But by the mid-'80s, the business was failing.
Well, I think starting your own business is risky, and I've never been brave enough to do that. Well, until we started the podcast. But still, I think it takes a lot of guts to do that, especially right out of high school.
Yeah, no college or anything.
Yep. Jake Jr. married his girlfriend, and he took a job as a horticulturist for the city of San Diego. Then after he moved away, Jay used some of the profits he'd earned from Landscape Matters to start a new career. He invested in a Phoenix comedy club called Chuckles, and the club booked some high-profile comedians, including Richard Belzer. Now, he was kind of a funny-looking guy. I think he was on one of those SUV crime shows. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, he was. Which one was that? The one with Mariska Hargitay?
I haven't watched any of those, so I don't know. But it was one of those crime dramas.
Yeah.
And he was pretty good in it.
At that, I wasn't familiar with him being a high-profile comedian, but that's just me.
Well, I may be dreaming, but I have some kind of vague memory of him being on Jay Leno or David Letterman, one of those old late-night shows, doing comedy. Yeah. So that club Chuckles was successful for several years, but eventually it closed down. After that, Jay moved into different sales startups. Facing bankruptcy and feeling like a failure, he met a man who was successful at selling Native American jewelry and decor at craft fairs and local stores. And this man helped Jay get started, and soon Jay's strong work ethic earned him a place as an independent seller. Out on his own, Jay established his own business. The jewelry and pottery he sold were just incredibly popular, especially in the Southwest. And within a few years, Jay was making over $100,000 a year. Jayhawk became Jayhawk International, and he began to travel. But he still traveled domestically, so international was a bit misleading. But the bigger his business became, the more time Jay had to spend on the road. And he was actually spending at least half of his time traveling across the country, filling orders and restocking his truck. Jay was a smart businessman, but he was also pretty caring and he could be generous. As long as he was financially comfortable, he wouldn't hesitate to help out a friend. And all of his customers would become his friends as well, pretty much. Although he was becoming wealthy, Jay certainly didn't put on any airs. He wore blue jeans with a big belt buckle, cowboy boots or sneakers, and a cowboy hat. He was not a person who spent much money on himself, and he tried to keep things pretty simple.
And when he wasn't at work, he was a pretty fun-loving guy. Well known for his relaxed and welcoming smile, and he was part of a large group of friends. His voice was described by his friends as booming and full of life. So he liked to work hard, but he also knew how to loosen up and have fun. And this is when he'd like to go to bars during his downtime, have a few drinks, meet some people, including attractive women. Jay was also a bit of a practical joker with his friends. As an example, one time he ordered shots for a group of friends, but he had the bartender give him water. Then while his friends got really drunk, he acted like the alcohol hadn't affected him at all. That cracked him up, and his friends couldn't help but have fun with it too. Yeah, it's really hilarious.
Well, you had to be there, right?
Yeah, obviously.
It's one of those things. But Jay was a decent-looking guy. Still, it was his charm and charisma, which usually attracted women to him. All through the 1980s and into the 1990s, Jay was a regular customer at Arizona strip clubs. He would go once or twice a week, and all of the dancers got to know him. With most of them, he was just a friend and a good tipper. But he did make some dancers his girlfriend from time to time. In the early 80s, Jay bought a house with a pool and a tennis court, and he'd have barbecues and pool parties. These were interesting because he invited dancers and topless waitresses to his home, and they'd play volleyball in these skimpy outfits. So his friends were all excited so they could come and see the women. But Jay definitely had a weakness for beautiful women, and that may have been what blinded him in his relationship with Marjorie, because he definitely had a type. It wasn't the Birkenstock crowd, it wasn't people like me that walk around in hoodies. It was the fancy women with the makeup and the big hair.
Yeah, the fleshy blondes.
He liked the flashy ones. He met her at one of his favorite clubs and fell in love with her very quickly.
So let's do a little bit about Marjorie. She was born Marjorie Ann Crow in 1961 in Miami, Florida. Now, her parents divorced when she was a toddler, and her mother remarried an air conditioner repairman. And Marjorie would consider this guy her father. Marjorie's mom was a kindergarten teacher, and Marjorie and her older sister had an average middle-class lifestyle growing up. So the family moved to a northern suburb of Orlando when she was still a young child. From the time she was 6, Marjorie took dance lessons, and that included tap, jazz, and ballet. She dreamed of becoming a professional dancer and choreographer. Now, she did have talent, so I guess that was a possibility, even though it was a long shot. She grew up to be very attractive, long dancer's legs. She was very flirtatious, but actually didn't date much in high school. After she graduated high school, Marjorie had jobs as a waitress and a hostess at different Orlando restaurants. While waiting tables, she met an older guy named Mitchell Markey, and she was very attracted to him because she thought he looked like one of the Bee Gees. He was 10 years older than Marjorie and financially successful. He owned a motorcycle shop. So very quickly after meeting, Marjorie and Mitchell started dating. And they became serious very quickly. They moved in together, and Marjorie took another job as a cocktail waitress and dancer. And when she was 19 years old, they got married. Around this time, Marjorie learned that her severe endometriosis had made her infertile. Disappointing to her because she'd always thought she'd have a family someday. So Marjorie worked at the Cheyenne Saloon and other bars for the next 5 years. Then she met a wealthy restaurant owner named Michael Peter. Now, this guy's 15 years older than her. Now, he was attracted to Marjorie, and he hired her to dance and choreograph dances in his club.
Yeah, so Marjorie's life continued like this for years, going from man to man pretty much. She worked hard and she earned decent money, and of course she met a lot of men. By the time she was in her mid-30s, Marjorie had been married 7 times.
Oh, jeez.
Yes, and most of these marriages were short-lived and volatile. She fell in love quickly. She enjoyed getting money and gifts from these men. A serial monogamist, she usually found her next husband before leaving her current one, so there was always a little overlap. But
Well, you got to have a backup plan, right?
I think that's the way she looked at it. Men were definitely drawn to her, but many of her co-workers saw her as being disingenuous and kind of a gold digger. After all, each man she paired up with was wealthy. But Marjorie explained that driven and ambitious men were drawn to her. So that's just what she liked. So as long as she's not hurting anyone, no judgment here.
In 1985, Marjorie moved to Las Vegas with a new guy. And in Vegas, she got a job working as a showgirl at the Stardust Hotel and Casino. Pay wasn't that good, but it was certainly a glamorous place to work. But her boyfriend at the time took the money she had earned and left town with her money, without her.
Yeah.
So Marjorie started driving. Her intent was to return to Florida, but her car broke down as she was passing through Phoenix. And that's when Marjorie began working at a strip club named Bourbon Street Circus. She was a big hit there, talented, and very sexy as she worked the pole.
Well, yeah, a lot of the girls in the strip clubs really didn't have a lot of dancing experience. It was more just for men to look at their bodies. But Marjorie could actually really dance. She'd been working there for less than a week when she met Jay Orbin, and she was soon making $500 to $600 a night dancing, in addition to her manager pay. She became familiar with many of the returning customers, and Jay knew all the girls there by name. But Marjorie stood out to him. She really impressed him. He noticed her in 1985 when he was in his mid-20s, and to him she was just this perfect woman. But Marjorie wasn't attracted to Jay, at least not at first. He was overweight, his hair was thinning prematurely, and with his huge belt buckle and a pinky ring, she thought he looked like a used car salesman. But once she sat down and talked with him, she really enjoyed their conversation. He was actually funny, very charming, and could make her laugh. It was only a few weeks after they met when Jay asked if he could see Marjorie outside of the strip club. And she repeatedly turned him down, but eventually consented to a Sunday afternoon picnic with him. She continued to talk with him at the club after that, and the other women at the club told Marjorie that Jay was kind to them and non-threatening. He was clearly financially well off, too. He drove a BMW and he spent hundreds a night at that club. So Marjorie agreed to another date with Jay. They went out to lunch, and after that they began dating. They dated several times.
And Jay offered Marjorie the spare room in his house. So I guess they're going to be like roommates, huh?
Yeah, he would pretty much do anything to be near her, I think, from what I've read.
Marjorie agreed, but she told Jay that she planned to move away from Phoenix fairly quickly, 2 or 3 weeks. Now, his house was disappointing to her because she had been expecting something nicer. There were a few romantic evenings and attempts at intimacy, but Marjorie was turned off by Jay at that point. So she packed up to return to Florida. Jay was nice, but he was far from her dream guy, and she had big dreams. She's going to see the world. And Jay's little house in Phoenix was not what she wanted, not at all. Jay begged her to stay, but she said, nope, out of here.
Yeah, so that had to be tough on him. But Marjorie returned to Florida and she took a job topless dancing at The Dollhouse. That's a club just outside of Fort Lauderdale. She rented an apartment and bought all new furniture. And soon she was making as much as $1,000 a night. She had several boyfriends during this time, and she actually married quite a few of them. But it just never worked out. In 1993, Marjorie decided to leave Florida and she moved to Nevada. For several years, she worked as a Vegas showgirl. She also took a job managing a dance troupe, doing the choreography and dancing along with the younger, less experienced women, wearing elaborate costumes. But her friends in Vegas were just hardcore partiers. They took weekend trips to California and out to Catalina Island. Marjorie continued to have short-lived relationships with wealthy men. By now, Marjorie was in her 30s. The partying lifestyle was really taking its toll, and she began to think about having a more stable life. She was thinking about being a wife and a mother, spending her days cooking, cleaning, driving carpools. And part of this was that she really wanted a baby.
And then in 1994, Marjorie got a call from Jay. By now, Jay had a very successful business with Jayhawk. He was 35 years old, had never married. He was living a bachelor's life, sleeping with as many beautiful women as he could, but he had never forgotten Marjorie. For close to 10 years, he'd been looking for her. And then while traveling in Vegas, he saw Marjorie's face on a billboard for the Club Paradise dancers. And he was excited. He stopped at the nearest phone booth to look her up in the phone book. Wow, we're stepping back in the time machine here, huh?
Yeah, remember phone booths and phone books?
Vaguely.
Yeah. And also, it seems kind of like a rom-com that he would see her face on a billboard.
Yeah.
That's really funny. But Marjorie was really shocked to hear from Jay after all of those years. But he explained to her that he'd been looking for her, and he asked her out again. That very same night, they met for a drink, and to Jay, Marjorie had only gotten more attractive with age. Jay looked about the same, but his hair was thinner and he was chubbier. But Marjorie had fun with Jay. He was very down-to-earth and funny. He was just so different from the men she'd been dating for the past several years. It was appealing. Jay returned home to Phoenix, but the two maintained a long-distance relationship. They talked on the phone every night, and Jay visited Vegas whenever he could. Marjorie still didn't find him physically attractive, but he clearly loved her, and he was just what she needed in her life at that time. So she eventually went to Phoenix to visit Jay, and she was very happy to see that he was living in a much nicer house now. He was obviously working very hard to impress her. So she stayed with him for 1 week, and that's when he proposed marriage to her.
Yeah, Marjorie declined his marriage proposal. She just wasn't in love with him. and she couldn't see herself living in suburban Phoenix. Now, she professed to her friends that what she wanted was to be married and settle down, right?
She did.
But maybe not with Jay.
Yeah, I just don't think she was that head over heels at all.
Yeah, but Jay didn't give up on her.
And he had a lot to offer.
He did. In 1995, he visited Marjorie in Vegas and they talked. And for the first time, she confided in him about her desire to be a mom. So Jay told her that if she would marry him, he would help her get fertility treatments and raise a child with her. Because for him, this was a chance to be with the woman he loved and have the stable family life he wanted. And Marjorie gave in. From her way of thinking, she'd already been married several times, so what did she have to lose, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the best way to think about marriage,
It
but
might not be.
I get it.
They got married that July. They eloped to the Little White Wedding Chapel in Vegas.
Yeah, I wonder if they were married by an Elvis impersonator. I hear you can do that.
I would insist on that.
But, this was Marjorie's 7th wedding. And this time she broke tradition and she wore a lacy white dress. She went all out. This dress had sequins and a plunging neckline to show off her breasts, which by now had been surgically enhanced. She was very, very tan, with platinum blonde hair teased up in the 80s style curls. She was marrying Jay for convenience, but he was clearly a man in love with her. In their wedding photo, it seems like you can tell, because he's smiling widely, and Marjorie's expression is more hard to read. She doesn't look thrilled. She looks kind of flat. But that summer of '95, Marjorie left behind the life of a showgirl for the life of a suburban housewife. According to Marjorie, she and Jay had a business-like agreement. She would live with him and get fertility treatments for up to 2 years. And if she didn't get pregnant by then, she would leave him. It wasn't likely to work out for them either way. Even in relationships where she was madly in love, she eventually got tired of it and left. So married to a man she was basically just tolerating, the odds of her staying long-term seemed remote.
Well, just the fact that this was her 7th marriage would make me figure that the odds of this being long-term are about 0.
True.
So Jay hired a fertility specialist and they ended up trying in vitro fertilization. This required 4 to 5 daily hormone injections in order for Marjorie to produce eggs for fertilization. So the shots were fairly painful. Plus they bruised her. And she had hot flashes and sweats, which woke her up in the night. And twice she had to go to the emergency room for ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is abbreviated OHSS. This is an atypical reaction that women may experience in response to excessive hormones. It can occur during fertility treatments, and it's typically triggered by hormonal medications, which can cause blood vessels in the ovaries to leak fluid, and this in turn leads to painful tenderness and swelling in the abdomen. And this would make Marjorie vomit and have severe pain, and she even had to have fluid drained at a hospital.
Yeah, so Jay and Marjorie were actually trying to conceive for months and spent over $60,000. He was patient and tried to take care of her, giving her back rubs and arranging to be home for any doctor appointments. Marjorie still wasn't in love with Jay, but she did begin to feel close to him, at least for some time. In fact, at one point, she told Jay that she would stay with him even if they failed to conceive a child together. And maybe they were considering adoption at that point.
Maybe.
Not sure.
But I also would be thinking, well, maybe she might beat the odds and make this a long-lasting relationship,
Well, yeah, if you want to look on the bright side, maybe she was thinking that. So Jay really surprised his parents because he brought Marjorie home to meet them after they were already married. They had only met her a handful of times and honestly weren't super fond of her. She was just very different from what they wanted for Jay. She wore miniskirts and high heels and lots of makeup, even to things where you probably wouldn't dress that way. To Jay's mother, Joanne, Marjorie seemed very materialistic and self-involved. She showed no interest in creating a relationship with any of Jay's family, but then Marjorie interpreted Joanne's discomfort with her as jealousy of the attention that Jay showered on his wife. So there was some strong tension going on. But Jay pretty much seemed to be oblivious to it. Marjorie wasn't honest with Joanne when it came to her past, not at all. She said that she had worked as a showgirl and a choreographer, but left out any of her stripping or topless jobs. And that's almost understandable, really.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah. But then Marjorie went even further. She claimed to have only been married once before, and then made up a story that her husband had died, leaving her a widow. She said that she and her husband had been very much in love and were still newlyweds when he died in a car accident. But I guess this story of a fatal car accident and losing the love of her life just wasn't enough. Marjorie went on to say that she'd been severely injured in that accident. She said she'd been in a coma for 6 weeks and had barely survived, undergoing multiple surgeries. So of course this elicited sympathy from the Orbins, even causing Joanne to cry for her. Overall, Joanne decided that Jay's choice of a wife was not her business, so she decided to be happy for him and tried to be supportive and welcoming, and she tried to welcome Marjorie into their family as she would any other girlfriend of her son.
That's right. Jay's brother, Jake Jr., was very happy to hear that his brother had married and settled down. Jay called Jake Jr. and told him that he was married to the love of his life. Then a few months later, Jr. went to Phoenix for a visit. At first, he was impressed. Marjorie seemed like an ideal housewife, and they seemed happy together. Marjorie spent her time cooking, cleaning, and remodeling the home, just this domestic goddess.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, Marjorie didn't hit it off with most of Jay's friends. She went to casual events like baseball games, wearing sequin dresses and high heels. She complained about Jay's friends, calling them an inconvenience. So what does Jay do? He gradually stops spending time with his buddies. He seemed willing to do whatever was necessary to keep Marjorie happy. And they had very old-fashioned roles in their marriage. Marjorie is keeping the house, cooking and doing the laundry. Jay was the moneymaker. House was immaculately decorated and immaculately landscaped. Marjorie herself was also very well maintained, with facials, makeup, hair extensions, tanning, working out. Where do we find time for all this? She also accumulated an impressive wardrobe, and this included expensive handbags and a lot of jewelry.
So in late 1995, Marjorie found out that she was pregnant. She was 34 years old, and she and Jay were just thrilled. Their son, Noah Jacob Orbin, was born in August of 1996, and he was a healthy baby who seemed to have some features from each of his parents, including Jay's crooked smile. Marjorie obviously loved her son, and he became the center of her world, and Jay even called him their miracle baby. But Jay was traveling for work, and he was away 2 weeks of every month. In an effort to be home with his family, he leased a space in a strip mall and tried selling his Native American jewelry and art from a store. But business was not good. He began losing money, and he was lucky to get 1 or 2 customers a day, so that's not going to pay the bills.
That sure isn't.
He really had to go back on the road to earn the kind of money he needed. So when Noah was almost a year old, they bought him a puppy, and it was a white Maltese who Noah would keep with him all the time. And the dog even slept with him when he was in bed. So it made Jay feel a little better when he was on the road that his son had the puppy he wanted. Jay's parents were really excited about having a new grandson, and every Sunday Jay would bring Noah to his parents' house, and Joanne would make brunch, and the family would all play games, usually like a kid's game that Noah could play. Marjorie stopped by sometimes, but she usually only stayed an hour or so. Joanne felt like there was something off with her son's wife, almost like she was just pretending to be his wife, but she never said anything negative about Marjorie to Jay. She just didn't feel like that was her place.
Yeah, and the Orbins also couldn't help but wonder about Marjorie's family. They never saw them at any family get-togethers, and Marjorie's stories themselves were sometimes contradictory. And she said that her family was large, but estranged. Her father was deceased, and she hadn't spoken to her mother in 10 years. She claimed to have 9 siblings who lived all over the world. She claimed to have a twin brother who was a male model who became a gigolo in South America. She even went so far as to show Joanne a magazine photo of a blonde male model and say that he was her twin. She also claimed to have another set of twin sisters who performed with Siegfried and Roy in Las Vegas. But the Orbins never met anyone from Marjorie's family until her sister Colleen visited. Now, Colleen was not a model or a dancer. She happened to be an overweight truck driver living in Texas. Marjorie would tell the Orbin stories about Colleen, which are untrue also. But no one ever confronted her about her lies. These are whoppers, too, aren't they?
They are. I mean, at first I might think there's just some insecurity there, but these are pathological because they're so unnecessary.
Right.
They're just way over the top. So in reality, Marjorie had simply lost contact with her family after high school, and she was embarrassed about her background and had barely kept a relationship with her sister. So Marjorie and Jay had these frozen embryos, and they decided to have another child. In 1997, she learned that she was pregnant again, but they lost this baby. Marjorie miscarried and had to undergo a D&C. Her obstetrician told her it was too risky to try for another pregnancy, so Marjorie and Jay agreed that Noah would be their one and only child. And what this did is it made him even more precious to them, and their worlds just kind of revolved around this boy.
And then for the next several years, Marjorie and Jay just seemed to float along, doing well together. Marjorie would later say that their sex life wasn't very good, but they did have the bond as Noah's parents. Jayhawk was very successful, and they had everything they wanted as far as material objects. Jay's family would say that Marjorie exaggerated her role in the business. She claimed to be his partner. She did answer calls on the landline while Jay was traveling, but most of the calls went straight to Jay on his cell phone, and it was only Jay who met with clients and maintained the inventory.
Yeah, but Marjorie did earn some of her own money. She started doing some hair extensions for women in Phoenix who she met at her gym. This is time-consuming and expensive, and it can take 12 to 14 hours to do a complete hair extension set, and it costs hundreds of dollars. But Marjorie did this out of her house for about half the price of a salon. And she made some friends this way too, because it took so long they'd watch movies and chat while she did this tedious procedure. Still, Noah was her main focus. As caught up as she was in appearances, she liked to dress her son very well too, in designer clothing. And she told some of her closer friends that she and Jay had an arrangement to raise their son, and she didn't have sex with him very often. It worked for them, so no one questioned or criticized it. The problem was that Jay wasn't seeing things the same way. He was clearly in love with Marjorie, and she and Noah were his entire world. After Jay had closed down that storefront, he was selling wholesale items full-time. So he bought his own warehouse in Phoenix for storage while he drove for 2 weeks every month in a box truck full of up to $200,000 worth of merchandise. He was very security conscious, but having a child made him even more careful about his own safety. So he bought life insurance for close to $1 million, with Marjorie as the sole beneficiary. He wrote a will, too, leaving most of his assets to Marjorie and Noah. To his good friend Gary, Jay left his list of buyers. He asked Gary to give 10% of all his sales to support Marjorie and Noah if something were to happen to him. So Gary didn't think too much about this, but after Jay died, this could be seen as a motive for Gary to kill Jay, because this pretty much would give him a stable career and money.
That's true.
For the foreseeable future. But as Noah got older, Jay and Marjorie were spending less and less time together. Marjorie showed very little affection to Jay, and she secretly began looking forward to the times when he was out on the road. At some point, she and Jay eventually stopped having sex altogether, according to Marjorie, but she still had a strong sex drive, so that was a problem.
That could be. So Marjorie appeared to be a devoted wife and mom to people who didn't know her that well. To those who had known her for quite some time, Marjorie was a manipulative woman. She was capable of kindness and affection, but she could also be selfish and calculating.
Yeah, so there's story after story of her doing things to neighbors and people she met, which are, not violent, but threatening and weird. Manipulative, too.
Petty little things.
So when Noah was 4 years old, he was diagnosed with ADHD, and his doctor put him on Ritalin and suggested to his parents that he should be enrolled in a sport.
4 years of age, that's a little young. It's not impossible to get a diagnosis of ADHD, but I always felt like a lot of 4-year-olds act like they have ADHD. They have an attention span that's 12 seconds.
Yes.
And they're all over the place.
Yeah, you're right. So I don't know how severe it really was. It depends on the doctor. I think some doctors are very easy to go ahead and give this diagnosis.
I think you're right.
But Marjorie took this advice and she signed him up for karate lessons and even drove him to tournaments. She traveled with him to out-of-town competitions, and she became very involved. She practiced his routines with him until he was one of the top students.
Yeah, I bet her training and choreography would be a big help.
Right, that's true. Many of the parents from the karate studio became friends, and they arranged group playdates and trips. And the studio owner was this muscly guy in his late 40s, who Marjorie was openly flirtatious with. And this got to be kind of a problem. It was to the point where other parents were beginning to wonder if those two were having an affair. Then Marjorie began to confide in another karate mom about her marriage. She complained about Jay and how unhappy she was with him. Marjorie really had a long list of complaints about Jay, implying that he was just using her because he liked having an attractive woman on his arm. And she also complained that he had a small penis and couldn't satisfy her sexually. Now to me, that's not cool. You don't do that.
No.
No, that's horrible. Then she called him controlling, telling one friend that Jay insisted that she follow his rules or he would throw her out on the street with no money and no place to go. And Marjorie also lied to her friends about her past. To them, she claimed to have graduate degrees and to speak several languages. But of course, we know Marjorie had not gone to college at all.
It would have been fun to call her on that and say, what languages do you speak?
Yeah, but who really does that?
No, you just sit and smile and nod.
And I bet a lot of them knew she was full of shit. That kind of person, you can usually tell they're making stuff up.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, you can.
So in 2002, Noah started kindergarten, and Jay and Marjorie bought a new house that same year. This was a bigger house in a more exclusive neighborhood. 4-bedroom, 4-bath, 3-car garage, large backyard pool. Sounds pretty nice. Marjorie was very excited about the house, and she turned her attention to decorating and making upgrades. So this seemed to keep her mind off her grievances against her husband, and it kept her busy. But in this new neighborhood, Marjorie was not particularly well liked. She wasn't very friendly, and was known as Barbie by the other parents.
So that's kind of mean.
Yeah.
Although I could see how she would have walked around thinking she was very hoity-toity.
Yeah.
I could see how she would be aggravating.
And Marjorie began insulting Jay more publicly, pointing out his excess weight and thinning hair. Now, yeah, he had gained weight since they were married. He traveled a lot, and he often ate fast food. At one social get-together that Jay and Marjorie attended, she referred to Jay as that fat guy.
That's just mean.
She had given up on encouraging Jay to be healthier, but she herself exercised hours every day.
Yeah, her gym, the local LA Fitness, was kind of her second home. Men noticed her there, and she liked to show off her toned body and get that attention. Then Marjorie began to become obsessive about Noah's karate routines. She actually wanted him to win so badly that she started to sabotage the other children. This is just so low.
Isn't it?
So one time she claimed that she put itching powder in the other boys' uniforms so that Noah could win by default. Then she began stalking and leaving anonymous threats at the home of one of the other mothers whose son was one of the top karate students. Then rumors were spreading about Marjorie. People were saying that she was in a lesbian relationship and also having sex with other men. So they thought she was pretty busy.
I guess so.
By the end of 2003, Marjorie was alone much of the time. Noah was in school now all day, and Jay was gone half the time on his sales trips. Marjorie began to feel more and more unhappy with her own life. And any love that she did have for Jay began to turn to resentment. She believed that he didn't deserve her, and she knew that she could do better. She wanted a sexually attractive man to make her feel desired and satisfied, but she didn't want to share custody of Noah, and she didn't want to give up her comfortable lifestyle either. So this was a bit of a conundrum. Remember, for Marjorie, the marriage is basically loveless, but Jay just didn't seem to notice the deterioration. He never mentioned any marital problems to friends or family, and he continued to live his life and grow his business. He began making investments too. And when he was at home, he spent most of his time with Noah. He taught him how to play baseball and helped him with school projects. If he was realizing that his marriage was in trouble, He never said anything, and he did appear to be pretty happy.
And then in 2004, he bought a larger warehouse in a commercial district of Phoenix. This place had a front office and a large open space for his merchandise. So every weekday, when he wasn't out of town, Jay went to the warehouse at 8 in the morning, took his own orders, packed up merchandise, and sent out shipments. Now, his business had grown a lot, and he had close to $200 million worth of merchandise in stock. But Marjorie's behavior was becoming more and more erratic. She was crushing and snorting Noah's Ritalin, and she asked around if anyone could get her some cocaine to help with her weight loss. She told one friend that she put medication in Jay's drink before he went out with his buddies so that he would become ill and have to come back early. She didn't show any love for Jay, but she certainly liked to control him. No one but Marjorie knows how many extramarital affairs she had in 2004. We do know she had at least 2. One was a teenager, and the other was a 60-year-old man. So JB was a 19-year-old karate instructor at Noah's karate studio. He was tall and fit, he had a black belt, and he wore a silver chain around his neck.
Now, he was actually the son of the karate instructor that owned the place, the one that she was flirting with and that there were rumors she was sleeping with him.
So she went after the son.
Went after the son. And he might have gone after her, too. He was of legal age, although very young.
Mm-hmm. Marjorie would often make comments about how she wished she was having sex with the young man. She'd known him since he was only 14.
Well, that makes it much creepier, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
She must have had like a matronly relationship with him prior to that, if she knew him when he was basically a child. So it's a little bit creepy.
Yeah, they started some mutual flirtation and soon began sleeping together whenever Jay was out of town. Marjorie told JB that she was leaving Jay and she wanted to be with him. So after a while of this more serious talk, JB backed away and the affair ended. So he realized what was going on, or what could be going on.
Well, yeah, and he was just looking to have some fun. He had a girlfriend.
Yeah, I don't want to marry you, lady.
No. He thought it was like a Mrs. Robinson type deal.
Yeah. So, of course, this pissed Marjorie off when he called the affair off, and she would cause problems for JB and his girlfriend. But within a couple weeks, she met a new lover. That's a guy named Larry Weisberg.
So this is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum because he was 60 years old.
Yes.
So she's gone from someone who could be her son to someone who could be her father.
That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So, but, he was 60. He was a divorced father of 2. Larry Weisberg was muscular and tan, with blue eyes, blonde hair graying at the temples. He did look younger than 60. Now, he worked as a production manager at a graphic design and production company in Phoenix. And Marjorie was attracted to him right away. Yeah, she doesn't do anything halfway, does she?
Well, no, I guess not.
One day, as Larry got off a treadmill at the local LA Fitness, Marjorie went up to him and introduced herself. They chatted a bit about their lives and their children. Larry's kids were grown. He even had 2 grandsons. Marjorie told him all about her son Noah. Then for the next week, Marjorie fantasized about Larry. Each time she went back to the gym, she looked around, hoping to see him again. Then the next weekend, she saw Larry lifting weights. She approached him with a smile on her face. She handed him a piece of paper with her phone number written on it. "Call me," it read.
So after she gave Larry the note, he smiled at her and said, "You're married." But Marjorie shook her head and said that she was actually divorced. "I just wear this ring to keep other men away," she said. Marjorie went on to tell Larry that she had been divorced for 7 years and that her ex-husband was a traveling salesman. Larry was flattered that a younger woman was interested in him. He had seen her at the gym before and thought that she was very attractive. "Given that you aren't married," he said, "what are you doing tomorrow?" So the very next night over dinner, Marjorie told Larry about Jay and their living arrangements. She explained that Jay traveled most of the time and wasn't around much. And she said when he was in town, he usually lived and slept at his warehouse, which was not true.
Right. Not at all. None of what she said was true.
Yeah, usually no.
So for the next month or so, Larry and Marjorie got to know each other over drinks, lunches out at the gym. After dating a handful of times, Marjorie went back to Larry's house with him, and they had sex.
The affair went from a hookup to a serious relationship pretty quickly. and Marjorie seemed to think that Larry was the solution to all of her problems. She described Larry as her one true love.
Yeah, no, we've heard that story before.
Yeah, it didn't work out for Jay, did it?
No, not quite.
So Marjorie dreamed of starting a new life with Larry. During their relatively short relationship, she wrote many notes and cards to him. And in those, she described how Larry had changed her life. She also described a very intense sexual connection with Larry. Now, Larry was a more practical person than Marjorie. He saw himself as a realist, but he was taken in with her. He had been alone for several years, and he'd forgotten how nice it was to be in a relationship. To him, Marjorie was beautiful, passionate, and very exciting. She told him he was sexy, and she was able to make him feel desirable. Like many men before, Larry was seduced by Marjorie. But when he first visited her at her house, he realized that Jay was still living in that home. It was obvious. You could see that a man was still living there. Jay's clothes were in the closet, and many of his things were seen throughout the house. And Marjorie just made excuses, saying that Jay traveled so often that he just left his stuff there at her house for convenience.
Yeah, no, Larry had concerns about being in a relationship with a woman who was still so connected to her ex. So he said that if they were going to be together, he wasn't willing to share her. Larry told Marjorie she would have to do something about the living arrangements. And Marjorie agreed. She said she had spoken to Jay and told him to move out. She said that Jay understood it was over between them, and he was looking for a place of his own close to Noah's school so that he could stay close to his son. And according to Marjorie, Jay had agreed to give her the house and pay it off. And a week later, Marjorie told Larry that Jay had found a house and was making an offer on it. So, of course, Larry's thinking, all right, that's a relief. We're getting some movement here.
Well, yeah, I mean, he hadn't known her very long, so he trusted her pretty much.
He did.
At least in the beginning. So one day soon after that, Larry took Marjorie and Noah to meet his daughter. She and her husband lived in a nice neighborhood across from a park. At first, they thought Marjorie was a really nice woman. Over the next couple of months, they spent a lot of time with Marjorie because Noah was close in age to Larry's older grandson, so they would bring the boys to the park to play together. During one visit, Marjorie pulled Larry's daughter aside and began complaining to her about Jay. That just seems inappropriate.
Just a bit.
She said that he was gone all the time and tried to make it up to Noah by buying him gifts and taking him places. She said that Noah really needed a good father figure like Larry. Then she said, Noah thinks Larry is his dad. So this really shocked Larry's daughter, as you can imagine. How weird.
How weird, for sure.
Then Marjorie brought up her future with Larry. She wanted them to live together. So by late July, Marjorie and Larry were speaking every day, and Larry was sleeping at the Orbin house every Friday and Saturday night when Jay was out of town. Each morning after Jay left for his office, Marjorie would call Larry right away. So by August, Larry believed that they were in a monogamous, committed relationship together.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble with this. I mean, he says that he wants her all to himself. What's he thinking when none of Jay's possessions get moved out of the house?
Oh, well, she has things to do regarding that as well. But I don't think we can assume that Larry's a perfectly innocent man here either. There's a lot of questionable things here about Larry and his behavior, too.
Yeah, down the road.
Yes, but it didn't take very long down the road.
No.
It was all pretty fast, really. Marjorie told Larry that when Jay moved out, Larry would be free to move in with her and Noah. And they discussed the possibility of maybe just selling both of their houses, merging their money, and buying a great new house together. But at the same time, Jay was completely unaware of Marjorie's plans. Jay was not considering moving out, and he hadn't made an offer on a house. He had no idea that his wife was having an affair at all. But Marjorie and Larry's romance was getting more serious. They had a very passionate relationship and lots of sex. Marjorie was living two lives. One as Jay's devoted wife, and the second as Larry's smitten girlfriend. It was really a dangerous game to play, but then again, Marjorie did have experience juggling men, so she probably thought she knew what she was doing.
August 26, 2004 was Noah Orbin's 8th birthday. It also happened to be the last day he would see his father alive.
So sad.
So this year, for his birthday, Noah wanted to go to a place that had video games, billiards, bowling, and a restaurant. The arcade hosted Noah's birthday party with a bunch of his friends. Jay's parents were there also, and Noah spent hours playing games with his father and friends there. Afterwards, they bowled, and then everyone crowded around and sang happy birthday as Jay carried out the cake with 8 candles. Jay said, "Make a wish," as Noah blew out the candles. And then Noah saw his mountain of presents, which got him super excited. His favorite gift was a Nintendo Game Boy. For her part, Marjorie was friendly with Jay's parents, and she's smiling in the pictures. That night, Jay tucked Noah into bed and kissed him good night.
So early the next morning, Jay packed up his travel bag with clothes and put on his usual outfit, a short-sleeved button-down shirt, a pair of shorts, and sneakers. Marjorie made coffee for him before he left, and Jay told him he would call her when he arrived in Tucson. So then he said, "I love you," and left. Jay Orbin spent his last 2 weeks alive doing business as usual. If he felt that something was wrong with his marriage, he didn't tell anyone. He didn't complain about his wife or share any problems in their relationship. He actually seemed happy in his final days. He didn't seem to know that Marjorie was in love with another man. There's really no way to know what he was thinking, though, because Jay was a very private man, and he didn't usually share his personal problems with anyone anyway. Also, according to many people who were close to Jay, he was a successful man who would never want to admit that his marriage was failing. He never wanted to admit to failure in anything. His usual work trips were 2 weeks long, but every quarter he traveled all the way through the southeast and into Florida. So this was time for that Florida trip. So he was expecting to be away from home for 3 weeks this time. This was September 2004, and there was a hurricane brewing in the Atlantic headed toward the Florida coast. Hurricane Francis was a Category 4 that ended up killing over 3,000 people. Jay heard about the storm as he was driving to Florida, but decided to continue on his trip, hoping it would die down within a few days. So his first stop was in Tucson, Arizona. As a simple man who didn't indulge in unnecessary expenses for himself, he stayed at the La Quinta. He spent the next day selling his merchandise to some of his regulars, and that night he went to a strip club he was very familiar with. In his room that night, Jay called a dancer from that club several times, but she didn't answer his calls. So we're not sure if he was hoping to hook up with her or just wanted to meet with her as a friend. We really don't know.
Well, then I'm wondering if this is a pattern for him. He's away from home 2 weeks at a time, and we know he likes strip clubs.
Yeah. Well, the strip clubs definitely were a pattern. Whether or not he was unfaithful, we don't know.
Well, I would infer.
It might. I don't think it would be terribly surprising if there was someone he was sleeping with.
Yeah.
But everybody thought he was really in love with Marjorie, regardless.
Sure. And the next morning, Jay stopped in southern New Mexico, where he made some more sales. Then he moved on to San Antonio and Houston. He kept in touch with family and friends along the way, calling his mother and Marjorie at least once a day. When he did arrive in Pensacola, Florida, he realized that the approaching storm would make sales close to impossible, so he decided to head home. It's a good idea.
Oh, certainly. And I think he probably wanted to get home anyway.
Then on his drive back to Phoenix, he called Marjorie and told her about the storm. He complained that many of his customers had boarded up their shops, both in Louisiana and in Florida. For the next few days, he went through Birmingham, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, and then into Texas again. And meanwhile, Marjorie and Larry were together nearly every day. Larry was spending the night there very often, and they were going out on dates, too, with Larry's daughter babysitting for Noah.
Pretty sick, really.
I guess.
So just before noon on September 7th, Jay arrived back in Tucson, just over 100 miles from his home. He checked into the La Quinta and ordered a pizza for dinner. The next morning, Wednesday, September 8th, he got up early and made some business calls. He wanted to go home that afternoon. It's his birthday, and he wanted to spend his 45th birthday with his wife and his son. He called Marjorie, but she told him that she and Noah had strep throat and that he should probably just keep working so he didn't come home and catch it. Can you believe that?
It's a lame one.
It sure is. According to Marjorie, Jay told her that he planned to stop at his Phoenix warehouse and make some calls and check his emails. And he mentioned the possibility of going to Utah or El Paso, but this would contradict what he told his mother Joanne. And even though Marjorie had claimed that Noah was ill, she did send him to school that day. So that seems like a blatant lie.
It does.
Jay's brother, Jake Jr., called Jay that morning and wished him a happy birthday. At 8:30 a.m., Jay also talked to his mom. Joanne wished him a happy birthday and asked him where he was. And he told her he was just outside of Tucson and was going to be going home. So what happened to Jay Orbin after that is unknown. What we do know is that he arrived in Phoenix, went to his warehouse, and did make some calls. Later that day, he was at a gas station a few miles from his home. Then, sometime after 5 p.m., Jay was murdered.
The day after Jay's birthday, Marjorie called Noah out sick from school. She made him breakfast and she cleaned up the house as he lounged around and played some video games. By that afternoon, Noah was feeling better. So Marjorie took him to Target, where she bought a lot of cleaning supplies, some boxer briefs for Larry, and a Nintendo game for Noah. And she charged the $482 to one of Jay's credit cards.
Now, I'm not sure if all she bought was cleaning supplies, boxer briefs, and a game.
Sounds like a lot of cleaning supplies for $480.
Well, I'm saying the boxers and the Nintendo game couldn't have been more than $75. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's a hell of a lot of cleaning supplies. And then Marjorie returned home and she shampooed her carpet. Noah returned to school the next day. And around noon that day, Marjorie went to the Lowe's store where she bought $170 in hardware supplies. And all that weekend, she was very busy cleaning her garage. Once she had scrubbed it from top to bottom, she applied an epoxy coating to the garage floor. Next, she moved on to painting the garage floor with a sealant. She also patched up a hole in the garage door and installed a security camera out front of the house. Also, Larry came over to help her move some boxes, which has to make you wonder what he knew.
Uh-huh. Well, we're going to get more suspicious of him.
Yeah, we are. But the next week, Jay still wasn't home. No one had heard from him since his birthday. On September 13th, Marjorie spent over $1,000 on sheets and home improvement products at the Home Depot, Walmart, and a store called The Great Outdoors. On the 14th, she bought a water fountain for the front foyer for over $1,100. And she spent over $1,200 on clothing, lingerie, and some other miscellaneous items.
Then on the 15th, Marjorie returned to the Walmart. This time she bought a car battery charger, a small ramp, caulk, paint, and drywall repair tools. 2 days after that, she spent $900 on a clothes dryer. She returned to the Lowe's that week 4 separate times, spending a total of $919. So at this point, her 6-day shopping spree is adding up to about $6,500.
That's pretty crazy.
It is. And all of her purchases were charged to Jay's American Express, Capital One, and Bank of America cards. Larry spent the night most nights. He would leave underwear, socks, shirts, and jeans at the house. In fact, Marjorie even emptied a dresser drawer for him.
So what's going on here? Is she delusional or just totally stone cold? Because this is very odd behavior.
Yes, it is.
The going out and buying this stuff, the cleaning, the painting, it's just so suspicious.
And she's not seeming to be at all worried about him.
No. And there's still no sign of her husband, of course. Some friends and business associates started calling the house and looking for Jay. Marjorie told them all that Jay had never come home on his birthday. Instead, she said he had continued his business travels. Then on September 14th, Marjorie left a message on Jay's cell saying, "I have a couple messages that I need to get to you, and a couple of people need you to call them back. Give me a call when you get a chance." Later that night, she left him another message. "Hey, it's me. I still have messages for you and trying to call you back." So that Saturday, Larry and Marjorie showed up at Larry's daughter's house. When Marjorie pulled into the driveway with Noah, Larry's daughter came outside and asked where her dad was. And Marjorie told her that she'd seen Larry in the back alley. So Larry's daughter went out back, and she saw her father. He was dumping a bunch of large black garbage bags into the large dumpsters out back. So this was definitely odd. Larry lived alone, and he had no reason to have all this trash. But she was busy mom, she had lots of stuff going on, so she just dismissed that, at least for the time being. But that's one of the biggest things that makes me think Larry was involved in Jay's murder.
That is certainly suspicious.
Yes.
The other odd thing is Marjorie's behaving as if Jay would never return. She seemed to be putting Larry into Jay's place in her life. Larry is practically living at her house. Marjorie packed up Jay's clothes and stored them in boxes in a closet in order to make room for Larry's clothes. And it just seemed like Marjorie, Larry, and Noah were a family. Larry played basketball with Noah in the driveway, and Noah's calling Larry Dad.
Now I'm pretty shocked that Marjorie could get an 8-year-old to call this new guy Dad, when he did have a pretty good relationship with his real father. So Marjorie must have been very controlling of the child as well.
Sure.
Jay's mother, Joanne, was calling and looking for her son, as were several of his friends and family. Their calls went straight to voicemail, and their messages went unanswered. Joanne called Jake Jr., and they worried together about where Jay might be. Had something happened to him? Had he been in a car accident? Joanne finally called Marjorie, and Marjorie told her that she had been busy painting the garage floor, and she really didn't expect Jay home for a couple more days. She actually sounded kind of annoyed by Joanne. So Joanne said goodbye and hung up, but Joanne had a very bad feeling. Orders were piling up at Jayhawk, and business associates were calling for Jay. Shipments weren't being sent, and some customers wanted answers. Marjorie told everyone that she had heard from Jay and that he was returning on September 20th.
Yeah, so the 20th arrives. At this point, no one's heard from Jay for 12 days. There's a friend of Jay's who got a call from Jay's cell, but there was nobody on the line. And then a business associate received a call from Jay's cell. Again, nobody on the line. And they tried calling the number back, but there was no answer. And that night, Noah was missing his father. A lot. Marjorie told him he might not be coming home. She told the boy that something horrible must have happened to his dad, and he could have been hurt by bad people. Poor little kid.
Holy shit.
Noah cried and clung to his mother to comfort him, and Marjorie soothed him by telling him that they had Larry, and he would take care of them.
So they're pretty much interchangeable to her. Just take one man and kill one and bring in another when you're tired of the first one.
Yeah, it's worked for her.
Well, it's worked for her, but this time it's much worse, of course, because she's not just leaving a man, she's killing a man.
Well, that does put a different spin on it.
Yes. Joanne called Jay's cell phone again that night, and when she didn't get an answer, she called his brother Jake Jr. She was crying when she told him that Jay was missing, and he got really worried too. It just wasn't like Jay not to call. Over the next 2 days, he called Marjorie and asked her to call the police and report Jay missing. But Marjorie was busy with her continued shopping spree. She went out. She spent another $1,600 on clothes and home improvement stuff. On the 22nd, when Jake called Marjorie, she was very short with him and very annoyed. She said that she'd been contacting everyone she could think of in order to find her husband, so she pretty much just wanted him to leave her alone.
When Jake asked Marjorie how Noah was doing, she said something that made him really stop and listen. She said that Noah knows his dad is missing and that he might not come home again. Now, it seemed way too early to be thinking in that direction. Anyway, that afternoon, Marjorie finally called the Phoenix Police Department to report Jay missing. This is what, 2 weeks after the fact?
2 weeks exactly, and someone that would wait that long would make me very suspicious.
As she did.
Because normally he called home every day.
Right.
So Jake Jr. drove out to Phoenix to help find his brother and to offer comfort to his elderly parents who were just beside themselves. Detective Jan Butcher, the lead investigator in Jay's missing persons case, began the investigation by doing a background check and running license plate numbers. There was nothing unusual in Jay's background check. She then contacted the people closest to him. So she called up Marjorie on September 24th, 2 days after Jay had been reported missing. Marjorie explained that she had last spoken with her husband about a week before his disappearance. Very calmly, she told Detective Butcher that it was unusual for Jay to go so long without calling her. She said that Jay traveled with a cargo truck filled with $700,000 in wholesale merchandise, as well as $30,000 in cash. She said that he had returned from Florida on September 8th, but he had then continued on to another business trip because she and Noah were ill. He was scheduled to return on the 20th, she said. Then she added that she had last spoke to him on September 17th, but had no idea where he was when she spoke with him. So if he's out on a driving trip and calls home, one of the main things you would ask is, where are you?
Yeah, where are you at?
But she's saying she didn't ask that and he didn't offer that information to her.
And when speaking with Marjorie, Detective Butcher felt like something was off. Most people who report a family member missing are visibly worried and upset. Marjorie was super calm. To add to that, she went on to describe her marriage as more of a friendship and told Detective Butcher that Jay had no sex drive.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
Well, we're trying to get all the information out there.
Yeah, that's really important to finding him.
When asked if her husband may have been having an affair, Marjorie said that it was physically unlikely. So she's implying that Jay couldn't get an erection.
Oh, yes, because she'd already told people things like that about her husband.
Right. And she also implied that Jay's business was hazardous, and it may have gotten him killed. She called the men in his business gamblers, thieves, and con men. But she defended Jay, in this instance, saying that he was a nice, honest guy. So here's this nice, honest guy doing business with all these gamblers, thieves, and con men.
So it did seem possible that Jay could have been robbed and killed on his business travels. Later that afternoon, Marjorie took Detective Butcher to the Jayhawk warehouse. Jay's white work truck was parked out back, but his green Ford Bronco was missing. Then Marjorie took Jay's checkbook and briefcase from the warehouse office. Marjorie returned to the warehouse with Larry after the detective had left. Marjorie cleaned out the wall safe, which contained coins, baseball cards, and letters he had written with instructions on how to handle his business if anything should happen to him while out on the road. She also took Jay's computers, his client list, and his desk. She and Larry loaded these things into the cargo truck and drove it back to the house. She said she was planning to run Jay's business from the house.
Jay's brother Jake arrived at his parents' house that afternoon, and he found his mother to be just this emotional wreck. Crying, she hadn't been sleeping, she was just a mess.
Oh, my heart just breaks for her, I've got to tell you.
Then Jake went to see Marjorie, and that was around 6 p.m., seeing if there was any news, and trying to figure out a plan to locate Jay. As he pulled up, he noticed a white plaster patch on one of the aluminum garage doors. Patch was 10-12 inches wide and 8 inches high, and Jake took a picture of it with his cell phone, because he's beginning to think something bad had happened to his brother.
Yeah, when Jake asked Marjorie what had happened, she told him that she had backed her car into the door. Then Noah came running out, excited to see his uncle, and gave him a big hug. While Jake was holding his nephew, he whispered to him, "Do you know why I'm here in Phoenix?" And Noah looked sad, and he answered, "Yeah, 'cause Dad's missing, and he might never come home." In the house, Marjorie went to get Jay's computer so she and Jake could look up his vendor list. And while he was alone, Jake looked around the house a bit. The kitchen was spotless except for piles and piles of papers. And he quickly realized that while he'd been calling highway patrols and hospitals, Jay's wife Marjorie had been sorting through Jay's insurance policies. Another red flag.
So Noah's getting hungry, and around 7:30 Marjorie ordered Chinese food. Noah went with Jake to pick it up. Then on the way back home, Noah brought up his father again. He said that his dad had called him a couple times, but he kept repeating himself. It was like a tape being played.
Yeah, so apparently Marjorie had held the phone up to Noah and said, "It's your dad." And then he just heard like a recorded message from his dad.
Right.
So she's trying to get it so it would look like Jay had spoken to people on the 20th. And that would explain those other calls to people where there was nothing on the other end.
Yes, it would.
The following weekend, Marjorie took Larry to a Sting concert in downtown Phoenix, while Larry's daughter babysat Noah. The next day was Larry's grandson's birthday, and they had a small party in the yard for him. Then Marjorie showed up with a rented pony for the kids. Larry's daughter was very surprised. She wondered how Marjorie could afford to be so extravagant. It was just a very odd thing to do. It wasn't even her own child's birthday. But Marjorie's trying to get really into Larry's family right away. On Monday morning, September 27th, Joanne called Marjorie and she told her that she and Jake Sr. wanted to go to Jay's warehouse and take a look around. Marjorie reluctantly agreed to take them there and let them look around, and on their way to the warehouse, Marjorie got a call from Detective Butcher. Then she agreed to meet them at the warehouse. So Butcher and other detectives arrived and looked through the warehouse. They found Jay's briefcase there, but it was totally empty. And this was very disturbing for Joanne to the point where she broke into tears, because she knew that Jay took that briefcase with him everywhere he went. That white cargo truck was out back. It was the truck that Marjorie had reported missing. So Marjorie told the detective that she had thought Jay was driving that truck, but she later realized that he had been in his Bronco. She insisted that she had no idea what had happened to her husband, but at the same time she showed very little concern for her husband.
Yes, we're showing a lot of contradiction.
Absolutely.
So then the detectives wanted to go to the Orbin house next and search. But Marjorie said no, they couldn't do that because she was going to be at Noah's school helping out. But she did agree to meet them at her house a couple days later. Marjorie left the warehouse before Jake, Joanne, and the detectives left. Now this gave Butcher a chance to talk to them away from Marjorie. Unlike Marjorie, Jake and Joanne were clearly distressed. Jake said that Joanne was thinking the worst and she was crying all the time. Jake was trying to stay positive, but was having a tough time doing that. They didn't have any idea that their son's marriage was in any trouble. They thought the couple had been happy.
Well, and I think that's why they didn't immediately look at Marjorie as a suspect in his disappearance.
Sure.
But as weeks passed by with no sign of Jay, his family and friends began to think that he had died in a car accident and had just somehow not been identified. But they were also pretty concerned about Marjorie's apparent callousness. She was often unavailable when detectives tried to contact her, and she rarely returned any calls. On her voicemail, she changed the recording to say, "If you have any information regarding the situation with Jay, please leave the information. It is very important. Any other calls will be returned when there's something to tell. I can't possibly answer every call, okay?"
Well, yeah, you're asking a lot of me.
Yeah, she's busy, damn it. So detectives spoke with many friends and associates of Jay. His friend Mario was the one who was the most suspicious of Marjorie. He said that he had been calling every hospital between Phoenix and Florida, and Marjorie would not answer any of his calls to her. He said that she just seemed inconvenienced by the whole situation, and she only showed concern with money issues. She was angry that Joanne was calling some of Jay's vendors to ask if they had heard from him, because she said that Joanne was hurting the business.
And Jay's parents went from concerned to frantic. They wanted to know where their son was. And they wondered, well, who's been using his phone on the 20th of September, when calls were made but no one spoke from Jay's end. So Detective Butcher got Jay's cell phone and financial records to get an idea of his movements in the days before he disappeared. His credit card receipts showed that he had stopped for gas in Phoenix on his birthday. That was September 8th at 9:16 in the morning. There was CCTV footage showing him driving the white cargo truck. And at 4:35 p.m., he stopped at another gas station a few miles from his home, and he's driving his green Bronco.
Yeah. Now, Jay's accounts all had a single signer. Detective Butcher noticed that his bank activity had changed dramatically since he disappeared. Thousands in cash had been withdrawn in $500 increments, the ATM limit. There were also thousands of dollars in phone transfers. ATM video showed that Marjorie was the one making all of the ATM withdrawals, and when confronted, she admitted it. She explained that she needed to have enough money for groceries and household expenses in case the accounts got closed. Detective Butcher called Noah's school to check if Marjorie was actually spending time there helping out in the afternoons, because that had been a common excuse for her. But the principal verified that Marjorie had not been at the school at all. She didn't volunteer there.
But I think the detectives are already thinking that they're dealing with a person who's fabricating a lot of the story.
Oh, absolutely. They have to be by now. Jay's Bronco was reported as being seen at 2 different locations between September 19th and September 25th. So it had been parked on a neighborhood street for days, and neighbors had called the police about it. A few days later, the vehicle had been moved. When Butcher canvassed that street, she found 2 witnesses that said that a woman in her 40s with long platinum blonde hair had been driving that Bronco. Marjorie's behavior was pointing more to a murder than a missing persons case. Detective Butcher called Marjorie, and when she finally got her on the phone, she asked her if she would take a polygraph test. Marjorie repeated that out loud, and Butcher heard a male voice say, "Tell her to go fuck herself." So Detective Butcher asked, "Who's that man?" And Marjorie yelled at her, "It's none of your fucking business," and hung up. So now they have to be suspicious.
Well, there's clearly a hostile relationship between Marjorie and the police.
Yeah, and that's not normal.
Nope. However, she still was spending Jay's money. She went to a store in Scottsdale and charged a $10,000 piano.
That's pretty crazy.
Well, that's to go with the fountain.
Right. Can't have a fountain without a baby grand.
Of course not. Now that evening, as she ordered pizza for Noah and Larry's dinner, a SWAT team banged on the front door. So Larry rushed at the officers yelling, "Get the fuck out of here." They ordered him to the floor and tasered him. He was handcuffed, but he continued to resist. So they tasered him again, and that time he stopped.
Oh, he was a bloody mess, too. They'd slammed him on the tile floor and everything. He was putting up a big fight, which is really odd. But it would turn out that Larry was on steroids, so that might have had something to do with his mood. Marjorie was also handcuffed and read her rights. When they asked her who Larry was, she said, "That's a friend of mine from the gym." Then she admitted that they had been involved for 2 or 3 months. Then she said that she and Jay weren't even married. So, as it turns out, Marjorie and Jay had gotten divorced, but only on paper, in 1998. And this was because of Marjorie's large amount of outstanding debt. They had done it to protect Jay's business, but he didn't look at it as a real divorce. They had talked since then about going back to Las Vegas and remarrying with a prenup, but they'd never gotten around to it. No one else in Jay's life had known about this divorce. It was totally a secret. Still, Marjorie had remained the primary beneficiary on Jay's life insurance, and they seemed married.
Yeah, I mean, they have a paper that says they're divorced, but they acted as a married couple.
Yeah. So in interviews, Larry defended Marjorie. He said she was smart and kind, and that neither of them had any idea what had happened to Jay. The house was thoroughly searched, and they noticed a large amount of home improvement supplies and all that paperwork on the kitchen island. There was not one picture of Jay anywhere in the house. They'd all been taken down. And the garage was absolutely immaculate, like you could eat off the floor. It had a new epoxy coating, and they had taped cardboard over the glass windows.
Huh.
And also there was that patch on the garage door. Also, the garage's walls and ceiling had fresh paint on them as well. That's a lot of work. There was a storage unit and an upright cabinet, and there were cleaning supplies. And these were the ones that investigators recognized Marjorie's purchases on the day after Jay went missing, and that included a new steam cleaner. Underneath the tool bench, they saw an electric handsaw. Larry's clothing was found in a dresser in the master bedroom. A purse in the bedroom contained over $3,000 in cash. They took paperwork, letters, life insurance policies, cell phones, computers, and things Marjorie had taken from the warehouse. And they also discovered a white powder in the master bedroom. They thought this was cocaine, but when they tested it, it was actually methamphetamine. So, I don't know if it was just Marjorie on it or Larry, but it could be something she would have wanted because she was using Ritalin and she wanted cocaine to help lose weight. So, methamphetamine could certainly make you lose weight.
It certainly could. And it can make you act a little aggressive, too.
Right.
So suspicions grew against Marjorie. Marjorie became more suspicious as a suspect as new information was revealed. Then, Marjorie cut off Joanne and Jake from seeing their grandson. Jake Jr., Jay's brother, was able to convince Marjorie to allow for a visit between Noah and his grandparents at a nearby park. Now, when she showed up, not only was Noah with her, but she had also brought Larry and his grandsons as well. So Jake Jr. was just pissed beyond anything, finding this to be a very disrespectful move on Marjorie's part. Everyone knew that she and Larry were lovers, and that he had practically moved into Jay's house.
So, let's fast forward to October 23rd, a month and a half after Jay disappeared. This is when Jay's dismembered torso was found in a Rubbermaid container, wrapped in black plastic in the Phoenix desert. A homeless man had seen it there and began to open it, hoping to find something of value. but the smell had shocked and disgusted him, and then he'd called 911. While the medical examiner was doing an autopsy on the remains, Jay's Ford Bronco was found, less than 4 miles from the Orbins' house. It was parked in an apartment building parking lot. The rear seat was down, and a can of air freshener was in the center console. The driver's seat was close to the steering wheel, which would point to a driver smaller than Jay. When police came to photograph the Bronco, some residents of the apartment complex were interviewed. One man said that he had seen a white woman with long platinum blonde hair park across the street, walk to the Bronco, and remove a sticker from the passenger side window. It had happened 2 weeks before it was found, he said, but he was not able to identify Marjorie in a lineup as that woman. The container holding Jay's remains had a set of keys inside of it as well, and when the police tried the keys in the Bronco that was found, they opened the door and they started the engine. The car was definitely Jay Orbin's. They did a check of the VIN and plates to confirm this, and then the case of Jay Orbin turned to a murder investigation.
3 weeks after finding Jay's partial remains, they just found a torso.
It's just terrible. I can't even imagine. The only way they really knew it was a body at first was by seeing the belly button and the belt buckle. So it's really horrible.
Thank you for that.
I'm sorry. It's horrible.
So Marjorie gets brought in for forging Jay's signature at a Circuit City. She claimed that she had just been replacing business computers. That had been confiscated by the police. She continued to deny having anything at all to do with Jay's murder.
Well, sure. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Unless you want to go to prison for life.
I don't think she's going to say, okay, jig's up, you got me.
No. A subsequent forensic search of Jay's warehouse did uncover small amounts of blood. It was found on the exterior door frame, the door leading to his office, and on a doorknob. They also found an open package of jigsaw blades with 2 missing, and these blades would be determined to be consistent with the cuts on Jay's remains. They swabbed the interior of an empty dumpster that was behind the warehouse as well, and that had traces of blood. Marjorie was notified at the police station that Jay's partial remains had been found and that his bank accounts had been frozen. But guess what? She was more upset about the bank accounts than the remains.
Well, that doesn't surprise me now.
Well, she hadn't showed any emotional distress, really, until she found out she was losing access to Jay's money.
And they didn't find anything suspicious at Larry's house, and he wasn't arrested. Now, the police did have a fair amount of concern about his behavior, but they didn't have any evidence of his direct involvement. And after being arrested on a fraud charge, Marjorie was released. She went directly to Larry's daughter's house and demanded to see him. Now, he turned out to be hiding from her in the house, but he did come out to talk to her after she started screaming and making a scene. In tears, Larry told Marjorie that she needed to go, so she spent that night in a hotel with Noah as the police continued to search her house.
So Larry got out pretty quickly after the remains were found.
Yeah, he said, I'm done with this.
So the blood at the warehouse did prove that something had happened to Jay there, but it still didn't prove that he was murdered. There were just trace amounts, not enough to prove a body had been dismembered there. It was known that sometime between September 8th and September 22nd, Jay had been killed and dismembered, but police had no idea where that had happened. The Rubbermaid container had been left in a place where it was certain to be found, so why was he dismembered? We can see that Marjorie would want him to be found so she can get her insurance claim. But still, why the dismemberment? They had to wonder if it was just to make it easier to move him.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, he weighed, what, 250, 300 pounds?
Yeah, he was heavy-ish.
So, cut him in half, make it easier to move him.
Well, especially if Larry hadn't helped.
Right.
Although I still have my suspicions about Larry.
Yeah, I would too.
So that November, homicide detective Barnes was able to get possession of Jay and Marjorie's cell records, and he was able to retrace Jay's final business trip from Arizona into Texas, into Louisiana, into Florida, and back home. Hours passed on the evening of September 8th with no calls, but someone checked his voicemail at 9:44 p.m., and that call registered from a tower near the Orbin home. So the detective's belief was that Jay was killed between 5 and 6 p.m. in his garage on his birthday. For the next 2 weeks, his phone was in Phoenix near the Orbin home. And then the calls made from Jay's cell on September 20th, the ones where he never talked to anyone, were made near the Orbin home as well. So when comparing Marjorie's records with Jay's records, they matched up simultaneously in their locations. When a call was made from Jay's cell, then a call was made from Marjorie from the exact same area. So this showed them that she had been driving around with both phones. They were quite stunned to realize that Marjorie had possession of Jay's cell phone all along.
And then while looking through transactions made on Jay's Amex card, investigators noted a $175 purchase at a Scottsdale Lowe's on September 10th. So a detective drove to Lowe's to get the receipt and learn what was purchased. Then after reviewing the receipt, the store showed the detective the surveillance video from the time of the purchase. In the video, a woman fitting Marjorie's description calmly pushes her cart up to the cashier and puts merchandise on the belt. Inside of her cart, the detective could clearly see 2 55-gallon Rubbermaid containers. Good evidence. Then the tape showed Marjorie buying the tub she would dispose of her husband in. And after watching the tape, Barnes grabbed a cart and went through the store, picking up the same items from the receipt. Marjorie had purchased 2 of the 55-gallon containers, both the same size and exact same color as the one in which his remains had been found. They hadn't found the second tub, so Barnes wondered if the other tub might contain the remainder of Jay's body.
Well, that would make sense.
It sure would. Barnes brought every item Marjorie had purchased on September 10th. And those are a 9x12 roll of plastic, disinfectant, floor cleaner, mop pads, and a box of 55-gallon black trash bags.
Right, so it's all really suspicious.
And at the police station, Detective Barnes went down to the evidence storage room in order to compare the tub from Lowe's with the one in which Jay's torso had been found. They matched exactly. Dimensions, size, color were all the same. Even the UPC sticker was an exact match to the barcode number on the receipt.
Well, and another detective contacted the Rubbermaid Corporation about the distribution of this type of container and found out that it was sold only at Lowe's stores. In fact, the Scottsdale Lowe's was one of the few locations in the Phoenix area that sold this container. So they brought this evidence to the prosecutor, and a warrant was issued for Marjorie's arrest for murder. It was December 6th when the police went to arrest her. Marjorie answered her front door while on the phone with her attorney, Tom Connolly, and Marjorie didn't say a word to the police. She calmly hung up the phone and put her hands behind her back to be handcuffed. Detectives took Noah to the police station to be released into the custody of Jake Orbin Jr., Jay's brother, and at the police station, Marjorie refused to be interviewed. And I'm sure that was at the advice of her attorney.
Absolutely.
After the arrest, detectives sat down with the Orbins and told them about the evidence they had against Marjorie. And once Jake Jr. heard about all they had, any doubts in his mind were gone. He knew that Marjorie had murdered Jay. On that weekend of Marjorie's arrest, Jay's loved ones met for his funeral, and his torso was cremated. They never found the rest of him. Several of Jay's friends and business associates stood up and shared some emotional stories about how Jay had touched their lives. Jay was remembered as a very loyal friend and as a loving father to his son, Noah.
Now, of course, Larry Weisberg is also considered a suspect in Jay's murder. After all, he had practically been living in Jay's house and sleeping in his bed after Jay disappeared, and his reaction to the SWAT team was suspicious. But the detectives had absolutely no proof that Larry was involved. Then his attorney would only allow Larry to be interviewed by police if he was offered immunity from prosecution.
Yes, I think that was a tough decision for the detectives who really wanted to get Larry too, because they thought he was at least involved after the fact, if not in the entire murder. But
well, I guess I would be suspicious. Did they have the information from the daughter with him dumping big black bags in a dumpster?
Well, at some point they must have, because I got the information.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure when that came out. Still, that's not enough to get a conviction.
No.
So terms were agreed upon, and Larry and his attorney met at the police station for this interview. Any information provided by Larry during this interview only could not be used against him in any criminal proceedings for the murder of Jay Orbin. But Larry looked at Detective Barnes and said, I don't know anything about what happened to Jay Orbin. I never met Jay Orbin. I have never spoken to Mr. Orbin. I've never been around him or anything else. The only way whatever I got information about Jay was through Marjorie Orbin. And that's all he wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, that says enough, actually.
But they wanted more.
Yeah.
They're pretty sure he knew more.
I'm sure he did.
So Larry went on to explain that in early September, Marjorie mentioned to him that Jay hadn't called the house in a couple days. Then suddenly, Jay's calls to Marjorie and Noah had stopped. Larry said he found this strange, and he told her to get in touch with the police and tell them that Jay was missing. A few days later, Larry asked her if she had heard from Jay, and Marjorie said she had not, but that she had reported him missing. But that was a lie, because this was over at least 10 days before she actually reported Jay missing, which was on September 22nd. But again, Larry denied any involvement.
Now, weeks after they took custody of Noah, the Orbins learned something that really disturbed them. When the baby was born, he had a small amount of brown hair, like his father's. But when he was a few months old, his hair had lightened to a golden blonde, similar to his mother's color. So the Orbins always assumed that this was natural. But while living with them, Noah's hair grew out dark. So they realized that Noah was never a blonde. Marjorie had been bleaching his hair since he was a baby.
Who does that?
Marjorie does.
So you kind of get this idea that she adored him and her world revolved around him, but it seems like he was nothing more than a token, a trophy.
He was a possession.
Exactly.
Just like everything else in her life.
Yeah, so it's kind of sad, but I'm glad that he did end up getting decent people to raise him, it seems. So in late December, Marjorie pleaded not guilty to the first-degree murder of Jay. In February 2005, the prosecutor announced that the state would seek the death penalty because of the heinous nature of the crime and several other aggravating factors. The trial was originally scheduled for April 2005, but then over the next 4 years, the trial date was delayed over 10 times. Throughout February 2006, Detective Barnes continued to investigate the murder. As news of Marjorie's arrest came out to the public, he began getting calls with some new leads. One call was from Marjorie's fifth husband, and he had a shocking story. He said that toward the end of their 2-year marriage, he and Marjorie weren't getting along, and during a fight he had threatened to kick her out of the house. The next day, he heard Marjorie on the phone with a friend talking about how she planned to kill him by luring him into the bathtub and throwing a TV in the water. Then a few days later, he's in the kitchen of their house, and Marjorie came up behind him and hit him in the head with a frying pan. Fortunately, he remained conscious and was able to defend himself, and they divorced soon after that.
Well, surprise.
But he never reported the incident to the police. Still, this was pretty good evidence that she had a violent temper. There was also an inmate who had been housed in the same cell with Marjorie during her first 30 days in jail, who told the prosecution that Marjorie had confessed to killing Jay.
Now, Marjorie's murder trial began in 2009. In addition to first-degree murder, she was charged with 4 additional felony charges for theft and fraudulent schemes against the estate of Jay Orbin, and each charge carried a maximum of 5 years in prison. On January 29th, opening arguments began. The state's theory of the murder was that when Jay returned home on September 8th, Marjorie shot and killed him in the garage while Noah slept in his bedroom. She then used a handheld electric jigsaw to cut his corpse into pieces. The motive for the murder was money.
Yeah, apparently the medical examiner believed that his body had been frozen for a time before it was cut up.
Well,
so there'd
sure.
be less of a mess.
It'd be easier to cut, right?
Yeah, and they did look into the garage freezer, but that wasn't possible because all the shelves were just part of the freezer. So they never found a freezer where that might have happened.
Okay. I would think that you could tell during an autopsy whether something had been frozen and thawed.
Yeah, and
Anyway.
that's what the medical examiner said. They just couldn't find a freezer where that may have taken place. Not surprising, though, because she really did a lot of things, and I could see her getting a freezer and getting rid of it.
Sure.
Not everything she bought was on Jay's credit cards. She also had a good amount of cash. So throughout the trial, the prosecutor shared compelling testimony from Marjorie's lovers, former friends, and former cellmates. They would tell the story of a cruel woman who had coldly planned her husband's death. Larry Weisberg was one of the first witnesses to take the stand, and according to Larry, Marjorie had seduced him. He said that the first time they had sex, Marjorie had initiated it.
So Larry's moving further and further away from her.
Well, yes, which is kind of the only way to save himself at this point.
No kidding.
In April, the prosecutor had been forced to withdraw, and the lead detective was being investigated for criminal charges. So at that point, it was uncertain if there would be a mistrial. But then in May, a new prosecutor was assigned to the case, and by May 24th, she was able to streamline the witness list, and the case was back on track. Computer experts testified that Jay accessed his email from the warehouse on the afternoon of September 8th. And that evening, Jay's email and other websites he frequented were accessed from the home computer. Other experts testified that Jay's cell phone had pinged off towers in Phoenix for the next few weeks following his disappearance. Jake and Joanne Orbin also took the stand to explain Marjorie's behavior after Jay's disappearance. Several of Marjorie's old lovers and cellmates also testified against her in her trial.
Marjorie's defense was that Larry had committed the murder after a confrontation with Jay in the garage. Then she would say that Larry threatened her and Noah if she said anything about it. Well, that's what she has to do, try to save herself.
Yeah.
The defense explained that Marjorie really had no motive to kill Jay. They had a friendly, if platonic, relationship. Marjorie had an allowance. She never wanted for anything. Then, in the summer of 2004, Larry Weisberg seduced her.
Aw, poor Marge.
Marjorie felt abandoned by Jay's constant traveling, and she was lonely. So before Jay left for his trip to Florida, the defense said he was aware of Marjorie's affair. Larry got access to the Orbin's garage using the remote Marjorie had given him. And when Jay came home, he was surprised to see another SUV in the garage. There was a confrontation, and Jay was killed.
Well, missing from her defense, though, was anything that could explain her behavior after Jay's murder. They seemed to accept that Marjorie wasn't totally innocent, even though her attorney never said that Marjorie had known Jay was dead. So while her defense implied that Marjorie helped with the cover-up, there was no testimony about cleanup of the garage or cell phones pinging off the same towers. There was no disputing that Marjorie bought 2 Rubbermaid storage containers after Jay's death, but she also had many plastic tubs in her garage. Larry could have used those tubs to frame Marjorie for the murder. But then if Marjorie's story was true, and Larry killed Jay in the garage of their home, why wouldn't Marjorie report this crime? Why would she lie to Jay's family and friends after Jay disappeared? There were just so many questions. Only Marjorie could explain, but then she didn't take the stand in her own defense. And the defense rested its case on August 30th.
Then over the next 2 days, the jury deliberated for a total of 6 hours. On Friday, they broke for the weekend. The next week, one of the jurors was out sick, so deliberations were delayed for another week. Then on September 14th, the jury reconvened. After just 1 more hour of deliberation, they had a verdict. Marjorie was found guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance for parole. The rest of Jay's remains, as you said, Jill, have not been found. Now, Marjorie appealed the ruling in 2011, and her convictions and sentence were affirmed.
So there are many reasons, in my opinion, to believe that Larry Weisberg may have been involved in Jay's murder, either before, during, or after. They did actually find some hairs in the Rubbermaid container, which were similar in color and texture to Larry's. Also, how could he not have known about any of this? He was at Marjorie's house a lot, and it just seems like she probably had help.
Well, if nothing else, how do you move over 100 pounds of dead body in a container? I don't mean to sound like women are weak.
Well, she was pretty fit, but that's very heavy for any person to do alone. And she did buy a ramp, so maybe she used a dolly and a ramp.
I guess that could be.
But I don't think we'll ever really know what happened, because she said she'll never admit to it.
Right.
She said she'd rather die than admit to it.
So you're going to end up with it being what she says versus what Larry says.
Exactly. But either way, it was a horrendous crime that she was certainly involved in, if not Larry.
You're right.
Yeah, although I do think Larry at least helped her clean up the mess and get rid of Jay's remains. But it just seems like she used this guy from beginning to end, which is really heartbreaking. because, everybody deserves better than that from someone they love. So it's just very upsetting.
It's a tough one.
It really is. So TCB's music is written and produced by Tristan Capel. If you have comments, a case suggestion, or a beer to recommend, you can send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. You can also visit our website, tiegrabber.com, to write your comments for us or leave us a voicemail. I'll also put a direct link in our show notes for you to click on, and you can record your voicemail right from your phone or iPad or wherever you're listening. If you'd like to support our show and then get your future TCB episodes without ads, plus an extra episode every month, you can subscribe to our premium show on our website, tiegrabber.com, or you can also sign up to support us on Patreon. And as if that isn't enough, we're going to send you a personal thank you note and a gift to thank you for your support. So what have we got for feedback today, Dickie?
Well, in a change of pace, I have one voicemail and 2 emails for you. And we got a voicemail from Mimi with a case suggestion.
Hi, Jill. Hi, Dick. This is Mimi from Mount Clemens, Michigan. Jill, Mount Clemens is sort of like Redford. There's good parts and not so good parts. And right now I am a foster care worker in Redford. So just a shout out to you. I am calling about a case of the 1990s. Her name was Stephanie Dubé. She was a runaway, and she was beheaded by 2 cousins, Rodriguez and Pena. Pena was 15 at the time, and though he was sentenced to life without parole, he was paroled in 2020 or 2021. That's a really interesting case. The beheading of the girl, her head was found in a freezer by 2 other girls. They put it in a plastic bag, and they walked it into the police department. So I think that part of it's really interesting. As far as breweries are concerned, I want to shout out to Great Baraboo. I used to bartend there, and they are in Clinton Township. But we have quite a few over on this side of the state. So I love your podcast. I listen to you all the time. Thank you, and I really appreciate hearing from you.
There, a fellow Michigander.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you for your work with foster children. That's amazing.
Yeah, so the perpetrators, there's no question that they did it. The murdered girl had been living in the house of one of them, so they did it. The guy was 15 at the time of the murder. When the Supreme Court ruled a few years ago that you should basically reevaluate life sentences for the youthful offenders, he fell under that umbrella. So he's out on parole.
I don't know how to feel about that.
Well, it did not sit well with the victim's family.
Oh, I'm sure not.
And they said there's mitigating circumstances that would keep him in prison forever. And they point to the fact that not only had she been beheaded, then they had filleted the skin off the skull.
Oh, no. That's horrible.
And they cut off an index finger and removed a spleen.
Yeah, that's the kind of person you don't want out there at all.
I'm not sure I want those guys. That one guy, the other guy's still in jail, in prison. But it might be a case to look at.
How horrible.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good recommendation, though. Thanks, Mimi. Seems like we have a Michigan theme in feedback today.
Well, I was going to keep that from you, but yes.
Well, I can see it.
all the cases are Michigan cases.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and read our email from Jennifer.
So Jennifer says, I have a great case for you from Corunna, Michigan in Christmas Eve 2019. Mark Latunsky had a grinder date with Kevin Bacon.
Not the Kevin Bacon.
No, this is another Kevin Bacon. So Latunsky killed Kevin in his home and cannibalized some of him. It looks like trial is finally going to get started in April this year. Just putting it out there as I find this case fascinating. So a lot more to the story, and I think you'll find a lot more info after the trial. So we'll keep track of that.
So not only is there a Michigan theme I'm seeing, there's a real gruesome theme today.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to do that on purpose.
No, well, murder can just go that way.
When Jennifer says they partially cannibalized some of him,
yes,
he cut his testicles off and cooked them and ate them.
Okay, so he has issues.
So I'll leave it at that.
That's horrible. All right, I have one more email, and this is from Colleen. Colleen writes, have been thinking about sending you the story of an unsolved mystery murder from here in my little tourist town, Traverse City, Michigan. I work in a radio newsroom, so I have covered this extensively. I also am friends with the mom in this story and the young husband, so it's become very personal over the years. In July 2013, northern Michigan native Kelly Boyce Hurlbert is taking her bike home after work when she is struck by a vehicle and dragged. Her injuries will prove fatal. Was this a hit and run or something more sinister? Interesting.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have so far. We'll have to check further into that in terms of was this, besides being a hit and run, was she a target?
Yeah, and what did the investigation find?
Right. So
thank you, Colleen.
We'll do some research on that.
I am familiar with Traverse City. That's a beautiful little city. So thank you, everyone, for your voicemails, your emails, and just letting us, come into your ears once in a while and tell you a story. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time at the Quiet End.
We'll save some seats for you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.